Have you ever wondered what your last name really means? If your surname is Rossi, Ferrari, Romano, Ricci, Esposito, Bianchi, Lombardi, Marino, or any other Italian family name, you may be carrying a piece of history that stretches back hundreds or even thousands of years. A surname is much more than a name written on official documents. It is a connection to your ancestors, a clue to your family's past, and sometimes even a map pointing to the exact region where your family first lived. Today, millions of people around the world proudly claim Italian ancestry. From the United States and Canada to Argentina, Brazil, and Australia, Italian descendants have carried their family names across continents. Yet many people have never stopped to ask a simple question. Where did these names come from? Were they chosen by kings? Were they created by churches? Did they describe a person's occupation, appearance, hometown, or family? The answers are far more fascinating than most people imagine. The story of Italian surnames begins long before Italy became the country we know today. It begins nearly 2,000 years ago, during the age of the Roman Empire. In ancient Rome, people did not use surnames the same way we do today. Wealthy Roman citizens often had several names that identified their family, clan, and personal identity. A famous Roman like Julius Caesar, for example, belonged to the Julian family, one of the oldest and most respected families in Rome. His name represented not only himself, but an entire bloodline with generations of history behind it. However, most ordinary people lived much simpler lives. Small villages had relatively few residents, so one personal name was usually enough. If there was only one Marcus or one Lucius in the village, everyone knew exactly who that person was. As Rome grew into one of history's greatest empires, everything changed. Cities expanded rapidly. Roads connected distant provinces. Merchants traveled across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Millions of people became Roman citizens, and suddenly thousands of men shared the same first names. Imagine living in a city where hundreds of people are named Marcus or Gaius. It quickly became difficult to know who was being discussed. To solve this problem, Romans developed a more detailed naming system. Families began identifying themselves by clan names, inherited family names, and descriptive nicknames that distinguished one branch of a family from another. Some names described physical characteristics. Others referred to personality, military achievements, or family history. Over time, these identifiers became associated with entire generations. But history took an unexpected turn. In the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Government institutions weakened, cities shrank, trade declined, and many official records disappeared. Across much of Italy, the complex Roman naming system gradually faded away. During the early Middle Ages, life became centered around small villages and farming communities. In these small settlements, people once again relied mainly on first names because everyone knew each other personally. There was little need for permanent family names. For several centuries, this simple system worked well. But Europe was changing once again. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Italian cities experienced remarkable growth. Trade returned to the Mediterranean. Markets expanded. Merchants became wealthier. New churches, castles, and town squares transformed the landscape. Cities such as Florence, Venice, Genoa, Milan, Pisa, and Bologna became important centers of commerce, banking, and craftsmanship. As populations increased, confusion returned. Imagine 20 different men in the same neighborhood, all named Giovanni. When someone asked for Giovanni, which one did they mean? The solution was surprisingly simple. People started adding descriptions after a person's first name. One might be Giovanni, son of Marco. Another became Giovanni from Florence. Someone else became Giovanni the blacksmith, while another was known as Giovanni with red hair or Giovanni the Tall. At first, these descriptions were temporary. They were simply practical ways to identify people. But as years passed, children began inheriting these identifiers from their fathers. What started as everyday descriptions slowly transformed into permanent family names. This marked the true beginning of Italian surnames as we know them today. During the 12th and 13th centuries, surnames became increasingly important because governments, churches, and local authorities needed accurate records. Land ownership, tax collection, marriages, baptisms, inheritances, and business contracts all required clear identification. Having only a first name was no longer enough. Families began passing the same surname from one generation to the next. Fathers passed their family names to their children, who later passed them on again. Some of these names have survived almost unchanged for more than 700 years. One of the most fascinating aspects of Italian surnames is that they developed in a land that was not yet united. Modern Italy did not become a single nation until 1861. Before that, the Italian peninsula was divided into kingdoms, republics, duchies, and territories controlled by different rulers. Florence, Venice, Naples, Sicily, Milan, Genoa, and the Papal States each had their own governments. Traditions, dialects, and customs. These regional differences influenced the creation of surnames. A family living in Venice often developed names very different from those found in Sicily or Naples. Northern Italy was influenced by trade with France, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, while southern Italy experienced centuries of Greek, Byzantine, Arab, Norman, and Spanish influence. As a result, an Italian surname can often reveal much more than just a family line. It may indicate the region where your ancestors lived, the language they spoke, or even the foreign cultures that shaped their community centuries ago. Every Italian surname carries a hidden story waiting to be discovered. Some preserve the memory of an ancestor's profession. Others remember a family's hometown, a physical feature, a personal nickname, or an important historical event. What appears to be a simple last name may actually be a living piece of history that has survived wars, migrations, and generations of change. And this is only the beginning of the journey. Now that we understand how Italian surnames first appeared, the next question is even more fascinating. What do these names actually mean? Contrary to popular belief, most Italian surnames were not invented randomly. Almost every family name had a purpose. It identified a person's father, profession, hometown, appearance, personality, or social status. Over time, these descriptions became permanent family names, passed from one generation to the next. If you have Italian ancestry, your surname may still carry clues about the life of an ancestor who lived hundreds of years ago. One of the most common ways Italian surnames developed was through a person's father. Historians call these patronymic surnames. Imagine living in a medieval village where a man named Giovanni had a son named Pietro. Instead of calling him simply Pietro, people might refer to him as Pietro di Giovanni, meaning Pietro, son of Giovanni. As generations passed, these descriptions became permanent. Families adopted surnames such as Di Giovanni, Di Marco, Di Pietro, De Luca, De Angelis, and Di Antonio. Even today, millions of Italians carry surnames beginning with Di de Della or Di, all pointing back to an ancestor whose first name became the family's identity. Another major source of Italian surnames came from occupations. During the Middle Ages, a person's job often defined their place in society. Blacksmiths, carpenters, bakers, farmers, fishermen, and merchants were all essential to everyday life. Because many people shared the same first name, it became natural to identify someone by their profession. A blacksmith might become known as Ferrari, derived from the Latin word for ironworker. This is why Ferrari is one of Italy's most famous surnames. Long before it became associated with luxury sports cars, it belonged to families whose ancestors worked with metal. Another common surname is Fabbri or Fabbri, which also refers to blacksmiths and craftsmen. The surname Fornari comes from the Italian word forno, meaning oven, and was often given to families of bakers. Pastor referred to shepherds. Marin or Marino often identified families connected with the sea, including sailors and fishermen. Contadini worked the land. Every occupation contributed to the creation of new surnames. Some professions disappeared centuries ago, yet the names remain. Another fascinating group of surnames comes from geography. As trade increased throughout medieval Italy, people moved from one village to another. When someone arrived in a new town, locals often identified them by where they had come from. A man arriving from Lombardy could become Lombardi. Someone from Naples might eventually be known as Napolitano. A family connected with Sicily might become Siciliano. People from Rome often carried the surname Romano. Families from Venice sometimes became Veneziano. These geographical surnames became permanent reminders of a family's original homeland. Even today, a surname can often provide valuable clues for genealogists trying to trace a family's regional origins. Some surnames describe physical appearance. These names often began as simple nicknames. Imagine two men named Francesco living in the same village. One has bright red hair, the other has dark hair. To distinguish them, people might call one Francesco Rossi, meaning the red-haired one. The other might become Francesco Bianchi if he had unusually light skin or white hair. The surname Rossi remains the most common surname in Italy today. It originally referred to people with reddish hair or a reddish complexion. Bianchi means white. Bruno means brown. Ricci refers to curly hair. Mancini often describes someone who was left-handed. Longo referred to a tall person. Basso identified someone who was short. These descriptions may have started as nicknames, but over generations they became family names that survived long after the original meaning had been forgotten. Other surnames reflected personality. A cheerful individual might receive a positive nickname. Someone considered wise, brave, or generous could also become known by those characteristics. Although many of these meanings have become difficult to trace, historians believe personality played an important role in surname formation throughout medieval Italy. Religion also influenced Italian surnames. For centuries, the Catholic Church shaped nearly every aspect of Italian life. Church records preserved baptisms, marriages, and burials, making them essential for identifying families. Many surnames originated from saints' names. De Luca, Di Pietro, Di Matteo, Di Paolo, and Di Giovanni all connect families with biblical or saintly first names. Some surnames reflected religious devotion or service to the church. Others originated from children left in the care of religious institutions. One of the best-known examples is Esposito. This surname has a unique history. In parts of southern Italy, abandoned infants were sometimes left at churches or charitable institutions. These children often received the surname Esposito, derived from a word meaning exposed or placed outside. Although the practice ended long ago, the surname remains one of the most common in southern Italy and serves as a reminder of a difficult chapter in Italian history. Some Italian surnames even preserve traces of foreign civilizations. Italy has always been a crossroads of cultures. Over thousands of years, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Normans, French, Austrians, and Spaniards all ruled different parts of the peninsula. Their languages and customs influenced local naming traditions. The surname Greco literally means Greek. Lombardi recalls the Lombards, a Germanic people who settled in Italy during the early Middle Ages. Norman influence appears in some southern Italian family names after the Norman conquest of Sicily during the 11th century. Spanish rule in southern Italy also introduced names that reflected Iberian influence. Each surname acts like a small historical record, preserving the memory of migrations and conquests that shaped the Italian peninsula. Another interesting feature of Italian surnames is the use of suffixes. Names ending in ini, eti, ello, uci, one, or aci often developed as affectionate forms, regional variations, or descriptions of family branches. For example, Rossini can be interpreted as a variation connected with the Rossi family. Paoletti likely originated from descendants of Paolo. These endings vary by region and often provide additional clues about where a family once lived. Regional dialects also played a major role. Before Italy became a unified nation in 1861, many people spoke local dialects rather than standard Italian. As surnames were recorded by priests, officials, and scribes, spelling often changed according to pronunciation. This explains why similar surnames may appear in several different forms across Italy. Even within the same family, historical records sometimes show multiple spellings of the same surname. For modern genealogists, understanding these variations is essential. Meeching for only one spelling can cause important records to be overlooked. Researchers often compare several possible spellings before reaching conclusions about a family's history. Today, Italy has hundreds of thousands of different surnames. Some belong to millions of people. Others survive in only a single village. Every one of them tells a unique story. Some speak of ancient Roman ancestors. Others remember medieval craftsmen, farmers, fishermen, merchants, soldiers, or travelers. Many reveal the landscapes where families once lived. Others preserve forgotten nicknames that became permanent identities centuries ago. A surname may seem like a simple word, but behind it lies a remarkable journey through history. It carries echoes of empires, kingdoms, villages, churches, occupations, and generations of ordinary people whose lives shaped the Italy we know today. And while we've explored how Italian surnames were created, another question remains. Which surnames became the most common across Italy? Which families carried them? And how did these names spread around the world? By the time the Middle Ages came to an end, surnames had become a permanent part of Italian society. Families no longer chose a new name with each generation. Instead, fathers passed their surnames to their children, and those names continued through centuries of wars, migrations, political changes, and social transformations. Today, Italy has hundreds of thousands of different surnames. Some are so rare that they belong to only a single family, while others are shared by hundreds of thousands of people. Every one of these names tells a unique story, and together they paint a remarkable picture of Italian history. Among all Italian surnames, one stands above the rest. Rossi is widely recognized as the most common surname in Italy. Its origin is surprisingly simple. The word rosso means red in Italian, and the surname originally referred to someone with red hair or a reddish complexion. During the Middle Ages, physical characteristics were one of the easiest ways to distinguish people, and a man known for his red hair eventually passed that nickname to his children. Centuries later, millions of people still carry the name Rossi. Even though many no longer have red hair, another famous surname is Ferrari. Today, the name immediately brings to mind one of the world's most famous luxury sports car manufacturers. But the surname existed for hundreds of years before automobiles were invented. Ferrari comes from Ferraro, meaning a blacksmith or ironworker. In medieval Italy, blacksmiths were among the most respected craftsmen because they created tools, horseshoes, farming equipment, armor, and weapons. Families connected with this trade eventually became known as Ferrari, and the name spread throughout northern Italy. Another common surname is Russo. Like Rossi, Russo also refers to someone with reddish hair. However, it became especially common in southern Italy, where local dialects influenced pronunciation and spelling. Although Rossi and Russo have similar meanings, they developed in different regions and became separate family names. The surname Romano has a very different origin. Romano simply means Roman or from Rome. Originally, it identified people who came from the city of Rome or had connections with the ancient capital. As people migrated to different regions, being called the Roman became an easy way to identify their place of origin. Over time, Romano became one of Italy's best-known surnames. Another surname connected with geography is Lombardi. This name refers to Lombardy, one of northern Italy's most important regions. It also recalls the Lombards, a Germanic people who settled in Italy during the 6th century after the fall of the Roman Empire. Their influence shaped politics, language, and culture across northern Italy, leaving behind a surname that continues to be carried by families today. The surname Greco tells another fascinating story. Its meaning is simply Greek. Southern Italy was once home to many Greek colonies. long before the rise of Rome. Even after Roman rule, Greek language and culture remained strong in parts of southern Italy and Sicily. Families with Greek ancestry or connections were often identified as Greco, preserving a reminder of one of Europe's oldest civilizations. One of the most recognizable Italian surnames is Esposito. Unlike many surnames that describe professions or locations, Esposito has a deeply emotional history. In parts of southern Italy, abandoned infants left in the care of churches or charitable institutions were sometimes given the surname Esposito. Although the circumstances were often tragic, many of these children built successful lives, and their descendants proudly carry the name today. It stands as a reminder of both hardship and resilience in Italian history. The surname Ricci comes from the Italian word riccio, meaning curly. It originally referred to someone with curly hair. What began as a simple nickname and gradually became a permanent family name passed through countless generations. Another well-known surname is Bianchi, derived from the Italian word bianco, meaning white. It may have referred to someone with very light hair, fair skin, or even white clothing. Like Rossi and Ricci, it reflects the medieval habit of identifying people by physical appearance. Marino is another surname found throughout Italy. Its origin comes from the sea. It may have identified sailors, fishermen, merchants involved in maritime trade, or families who lived near the coast. Given Italy's long coastline and rich maritime history, it is no surprise that Marino became so widespread. Some surnames became associated with noble families. During the Renaissance, wealthy banking families, powerful merchants, and influential rulers shaped the political landscape of Italy. Perhaps the most famous was the Medici family of Florence. The Medici began as successful bankers, but eventually became rulers of Florence. They sponsored artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, and many others. Their support helped create one of the greatest periods of artistic achievement in world history. Although Medici is less common today than names like Rossi or Ferrari, it remains one of the most historically significant surnames in Italy. Another famous noble surname is Sforza. The Sforza family ruled Milan during the Renaissance and became known for their military leadership and patronage of art and architecture. Their influence can still be seen in many historic buildings throughout northern Italy. As centuries passed, Italy experienced enormous social and economic changes. During the 19th century, many Italians faced poverty, unemployment, and limited opportunities. Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, millions decided to leave their homeland in search of a better future. This became one of the largest migration movements in modern history. Ships carrying Italian families crossed the Atlantic Ocean, arriving in countries such as the United States, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and Uruguay. Others settled in Australia, France, Belgium, and Germany. For many immigrants, their surname became the strongest connection to the homeland they had left behind. However, life in a new country often brought unexpected challenges. Immigration officials sometimes struggled to understand Italian pronunciation. Some surnames were misspelled in official records. Others were shortened or adapted to fit local languages. In some cases, families themselves simplified difficult spellings to help future generations integrate more easily into their new communities. Despite these changes, countless Italian surnames survived remarkably well. Today, names like Rossi, Romano, Ferrari, Greco, Esposito, Marino, Ricci, Lombardi, and Bianchi can be found not only throughout Italy, but also in cities such as New York, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, Toronto, Melbourne, and many other places around the world. These names tell the story of migration, resilience, and cultural identity. For millions of descendants, a surname remains one of the strongest links to their Italian heritage. Even if their families left Italy generations ago, their names continue to preserve a connection to villages, occupations, regions, and ancestors who lived centuries earlier. Modern genealogy has made it easier than ever to explore these family histories. Digital archives, church records, Immigration documents and DNA testing have helped millions of people reconnect with their Italian roots. Yet tracing an Italian family tree is not always easy. Records may span different kingdoms, dialects, languages, and centuries of political change. Understanding where to search and how to interpret historical documents can make all the difference. By now, we've discovered how Italian surnames were created, what many of them mean, and how they spread across the world through centuries of migration. But perhaps the biggest question still remains: how can you discover your own Italian family history? For many people, the journey begins with nothing more than a last name. Whether your surname is Rossi, Ferrari, Romano, Bianchi, Greco, Lombardi, Marino, Esposito, or something far less common, it can serve as the first clue in uncovering generations of family history. The first step is to talk with the oldest members of your family. Grandparents, great aunts, great uncles, and older relatives often remember stories that never appear in official records. They may know the name of the village your ancestors came from, the year they immigrated, or the names of relatives who remained in Italy. Even small details can become valuable clues later. After gathering family stories, the next step is collecting documents. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, baptism records, passports, military papers, family Bibles, old photographs, and handwritten letters can reveal names, dates, and places that help build a family tree. One of the most valuable sources for Italian genealogy is the Catholic Church. For centuries, local parishes carefully recorded baptisms, marriages, and burials. In many parts of Italy, these church records extend back to the 1500s, and sometimes even earlier. Since Italy did not become a unified nation until 1861, church registers often provide the oldest surviving records for ordinary families. Civil records are equally important. Beginning in the 19th century, many Italian communities started keeping official government records of births, marriages, and deaths. These documents often include parents' names, occupations, addresses, and ages, making them extremely useful for tracing family connections across generations. If your ancestors emigrated from Italy, immigration records can provide another major breakthrough. Between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, millions of Italians crossed the Atlantic in search of new opportunities. Passenger lists often recorded the immigrant's hometown, age, occupation, destination, and even the names of relatives waiting for them in their new country. Naturalization records, census documents, military registrations, and local newspapers can also help fill in missing pieces of your family's story. In recent years, DNA testing has become another powerful tool for genealogy. Although a DNA test cannot tell you the exact meaning of your surname, it can connect you with relatives around the world who share portions of your genetic heritage. Many people have discovered unknown cousins, distant family branches, and even the specific regions of Italy where their ancestors once lived. However, experienced genealogists agree on one important point: DNA should never replace historical records. Instead, it works best when combined with documents, photographs, church registers, and family stories. Together, these sources create a much more complete picture of your ancestry. While researching Italian surnames, you'll also discover something surprising. Not every family sharing the same surname is related. Take the surname Rossi, for example. Because the name simply describes someone with red hair, it developed independently in many different villages across Italy. Hundreds of unrelated families may have adopted the surname centuries ago without sharing a common ancestor. The same is true for occupational surnames such as Ferrari or geographic surnames like Romano and Lombardi. This is why tracing a family tree requires more than just comparing surnames. Dates, locations, and historical records are essential for proving genuine family connections. Regional history also plays an important role. Before Italy became a unified nation, each region followed its own customs, spoke its own dialect, and maintained its own records. Understanding local history often helps explain why certain surnames appear in one province but are almost unknown in another. Migration inside Italy also shaped family names. Families frequently moved from villages to growing cities in search of work. Others relocated because of wars, natural disasters, or economic hardship. Every move left another chapter in the story of a surname. For descendants living outside Italy, reconnecting with ancestral villages can be an emotional experience. Many travelers visit the churches where their great-grandparents were baptized, walk the same streets their ancestors once knew, and meet distant relatives who still carry the same family name. What begins as historical research often becomes a deeply personal journey of identity and belonging. Italian surnames have survived the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, medieval kingdoms, the Renaissance, foreign invasions, political revolutions, mass immigration, and 2 world wars. Through all of these changes, they continued to connect one generation to the next. Every surname represents real people: farmers, craftsmen, sailors, merchants, soldiers, artists, priests, mothers, fathers, and children, whose lives helped shape the history of Italy. Whether your ancestors came from the snowy Alps of the north, the rolling hills of Tuscany, the busy streets of Rome, the vineyards of Piedmont, the coast of Liguria, the mountains of Calabria, or the island of Sicily, your surname carries a story worth discovering. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: a surname is more than a family label. It is a bridge between the past and the present. It reminds us that history is not only found in books, museums, or ancient ruins. History also lives within our own families, carried from one generation to another through the names we continue to use today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of Italian last names. If you discovered something new or found a deeper connection to your own heritage, consider sharing your family surname and the region your ancestors came from in the comments. Every name has a story, and together, those stories help preserve the rich history of Italy for future generations. Until next time, keep exploring your roots, because sometimes the greatest adventure begins with a single name.